We're joined now by youth and gender equity and advocate Rinsola, Abiola, and Adebowale Olorunmola, who is the country director, Westminster Foundation for Democracy. Thank you for joining us on Newsnight. Let's start from the studio. Ladies first, they say. We need to know what you feel about the current representation of women in the political arena in Nigeria.
So I would start by saying that it is abysmal and there's room to do a lot more. Let's look at the 2023 elections, for instance. We had just in total 17 women elected at the end of the elections, 17 women elected into the National Assembly, 14 in the House of Representatives and 3 in the Senate. At the state level, we have just 48 women state legislators out of almost 1,000 legislators at the state level. And in our states, because, and I'm very particular about emphasizing states, because most people tend to just focus on what is happening at the federal level without really looking at their states. In states, a lot of appointments have been made. Many governors are still yet to fully constitute their cabinets. But the level of women's representation that we've seen so far has not been very encouraging, except when you look at states like Kwara, and you look at states like Kaduna that have the significant number of women in the cabinet that's been put together and appointments announced so far. But the others, we're still waiting to see how they intend to correct the lack of balance. And then we're also hoping that with lots of elections being contested, especially the legislative elections, perhaps by the time the election tribunals are done sitting and whoever loses out has concluded their appeal, more women are put in the House, whether it's in the House of Reps or the Senate by the courts, nullifying the elections of men who won. Not like I wish them bad, but it would be good to have more women emerge. Then at the federal level, I would say that the president has done well, by appointing quite a number of women as ministers. And now that, again, based on the news we've gotten so far about election tribunals, it seems some of the ministers might be returning to either the Senate or the House of Representatives at the end when all of it is concluded. And we're hoping that perhaps he would also replace those who leave with women as well to bolster the number of women ministers that we currently have. And he's also done quite well. We still have quite a number of appointments to go, but he's done well with appointing women to head agencies so far. I can think of Mojoyolua, the lady at NEMCO, and Bisoye Coker at NIMC. And if we look at the tax reform committee as well, there was a young woman who was there, very young, a 400 level student of University of Ibadan, Miss Agbaje. So we have quite a number of women who have been prominent so far. He's appointed some female personal aides as well. Dr. Auntie Hadiza Bala Usman is a special advisor. So we're hoping that we'll have more women be appointed, especially now that board appointments are about to be made. So perhaps we can also look at the fact that women are very well represented in elective positions, and then make up for that underrepresentation through appointive positions.
All right, very well put, Rinsola, Abiola. Let's bring it to Adebowale Olorunmola, is the country director, Westminster Foundation for Democracy. Well, let's talk about what seems to be tokenism on the part of political parties. But inclusivity cannot be limited to women being involved in politics alone. Where does it need to start in a way that it will have a far-reaching impact?
Thank you for having me. Inclusivity certainly, as you said, goes beyond inclusion of women, which is very vital. But we have to look at the demography of our population and expand inclusion to include young people, persons with disabilities, who are traditionally regarded as the excluded or underrepresented groups. And this segment of the society that we're talking about, for instance, the young people, constitute over 70% of our population. And when you consider that percentage to the level of representation that we have now, although we've made a bit of a gain in terms of having youth in the process, but that is still tokenistic, as we have said. And in terms of persons with disability, the percentage we have is about 30%, and that is very huge. If you even consider the percentage of the registered voters that get to elect the president and other officials in Nigeria, I think 30% of the population is huge, and therefore we need to think and take actionable steps towards expanding the space to include them in the process, not just having them participate, but to be involved in the decisions that affect their everyday life. And that is what democracy is all about, and we should not be found to be in the deficit.
And then when we also think about people or persons living with disabilities, Rinsola, let's come back to you. Are you also including these sort of people, the people living with disabilities, one form of it or the other, in your campaign?
So for me personally, I advocate for the inclusion of marginalized groups. I'm a young person, I'm a woman, so definitely I advocate for young people and women. And yet I also understand that people with disabilities also have a lot to offer in terms of value. Many of them are very learned. There is really nothing that any of us could deliver on that they can't. They just happen to have a physical impairment or the other. And I don't think that they should be excluded from governance and from decision making. So the same way we've been able to gain some ground when it comes to the advocacy for women, the advocacy for young people, I believe at political party level and in government, we also have to be mindful of the fact that we have people with disabilities who have everything that it takes to serve their country, to contribute to governance, to contribute to politics, to really deepen our politics. I know full well that during campaigns, candidates usually engage people with disabilities in their respective colonies, because many of them tend to live in a community, and they actually do contribute votes in block numbers and really large numbers to politicians that they wish to support. So I think it would be good to actually reward this participation and this steadfastness and ensure that they are also equally well and adequately represented in all the structures that matter.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Olorunmola, I mean, what role, how is the Westminster Foundation for Democracy helping the political parties, go beyond tokenism again, to ensure that inclusivity is the norm in the political parties? What kind of support are you providing?
First of all, let me say the country strategy of the Westminster Foundation for Democracy in Nigeria is inclusive citizen participation in the democratic process. And therefore, it is our objective to ensure that as many women, as many youth, as many persons with disability as possible are involved in the process and are seen not only as voting, but also capable to stand to be elected, to be appointed into positions. And honestly, if we look at young people in Nigeria, and even with women, they come with a lot of capacities. I would say that if you look at the UK Parliament, for instance, we have about 9 MPs of Nigerian descent who are elected, fairly and squarely in the UK Parliament. Most of them are women, most of them are youth. And you will ask me, if they stand for election in Nigeria, would they have been elected, or would they have been considered as electable? So for us as at WFD, we've been working with the political parties to build their capacity, to engage them, to advocate that they open up, they become more democratic, they become more inclusive. We have been engaging with the youth wing of political parties, developing what we call technical actionable steps that they need to take to ensure that they engage with the leadership of political parties and not be limited by the provision in the Constitution, which provides for youth leaders at the state level, at the national level, at the grassroots, but to be seen as being considered for other positions based on their, on their capacity, as mentioned by Rinsola Abiola. At the same time, we have been working with the women, and we are still going to be working, with the women also to engage the process. WFD has also, been conducting policy researches for political parties on the best practices for them to begin to take steps to open up themselves and also take advantage of the demand side of inclusion. Young people have been very loud about expressing their desire to be involved in the process. And I would say that for me, the 2020 NSAS protest was a positive expression of the eagerness of young people to participate in the process, for their voices to be heard. And it is our responsibilities, particularly the political parties, to begin to channel this energy of young people into constructive engagement by making themselves attractive, by putting the ideology out there, and letting people, particularly young people and the other groups that are underrepresented but who constitute huge demography, know how different they are from other political parties, and to begin to take steps to become members. For persons with disabilities, we conducted an assessment, inclusivity assessment of political parties in their practices towards the election last year. And honestly, what we came up with was a huge gap in terms of involvement of persons with disabilities. Some political parties do have provisions and do have individuals representing persons with disabilities. But it goes beyond just having individuals as women leaders, as youth leaders, as representatives of persons with disability. But for PWDs, particularly persons with disability, it includes making their secretariat accessible, and put in such a situation as to make persons with disability, whether visually impaired, whether hearing impaired, to be able to function in their secretariat as independently as possible. Those are some of the provisions or technical support we are going to be providing to political parties to ensure that their secretariats are as inclusive as possible. And of course, they begin to look at capacity and how to use the capacity of young people, of women and PWDs as constructively as possible. Importantly, we are going to be coming up with what we call the Political Parties Performance Index. And this is going to be what you would call evidence-based engagement of political parties, which is a departure from the traditional ways in which political parties are being engaged before now and even now. So this is going to be looking at the structures. How many women, for instance, do we have in the National Working Committee of Political Parties? How many women do we have elected, on the platform of each political party? How many youth? How many persons with disability? And I think on this basis, we will have evidence to be able to advocate, to engage, and constructively look at what needs to change. At the moment, we are having a 2-day leadership conference for leaders of political parties to look inward, to look at themselves as political parties,
yes,
and
indeed.
look at what needs to change.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Adebowale Olorunmola is Country Director, Westminster Foundation for Democracy. And of course, we've also been joined by Rinsola, Abiola, Youth and Gender Equity Advocate. Thank you very much for your work.